Hello, welcome. It is Wednesday evening, January 30th, and it's 6:30 after work. It's dark outside, and I'm eating my supper. Have a little dessert. Supper made by my daughter Elizabeth. Dessert made by my daughter Catherine. I'm very fortunate. Shepherd's pie. I don't know if you've ever had shepherd's pie. She made this with ground meat, chopped onion, chopped carrots, and then she put in like a vegetable medley that had peas, green beans, and carrots in it. And she sauteed that first with, some spices, and she was supposed to add Worcestershire, but in place of Worcestershire, she used soy sauce. And then you boil your potatoes, and then once the potatoes are soft, you put the ground meat mixture in the casserole dish, and then you cover it with the mashed potatoes. And she just mashed them with a fork, like it was like a rough mash, not like a smooth not like a smooth whipped potato, but more like a real mashed potato. And then she baked in the oven for about 30 minutes. So I'm eating leftovers. And I don't know about you, but I like leftovers. And I think I need more light. Don't you? I think, I don't know. I hope you can see me well. I have a shadow here. But I wanted to, and I hope you don't mind that I'm eating in front of you, but it's after work and I haven't had my supper. That's good. It's one of those dishes, sort of like chili or sloppy joes, that just taste better the next day. That sort of thing. I wanted to pick up where I left off with my previous video. One of my viewers reached out to me regarding one of my videos, how she learned a lot from the video. And she had taken 2 previous classes, in-person quilt classes, to learn how to make quilts. But unfortunately, she left both of those classes disappointed and frustrated. But she ended up learning more from my one video. Thank you for reaching out to me and letting me know that, because it means that I'm reaching my audience and you understand what I'm trying to convey. It's also telling me that I would like to bridge the gap between what you already know and what maybe you can learn more of, or what you don't know and what you need to know in order to move forward in your quilting life. So, with that being said, I'm going to go over this quilt that I have up on my design board after I'm done eating. It's a quilt that I had done in a previous video, and I'll leave a link below to that video. Over the last 3 weeks, since the holidays, I've been trying to work on a couple of WIPs. If you don't know what that is, it's a work in progress. WIP, work in progress, or some people call them UFOs. UFO meaning unfinished object. And with the new year, that's something that I want to do, because as I complete videos, I don't always complete the projects that I do in the video. Chocolate cake. You want to join me? Grab your favorite drink. One of the things that we like to do when we're out and about, either running errands or let's say we take a day trip somewhere, we love to go to the gas station and get slushies. And I like the cherry mixed with Coca-Cola. It's the thing that we do. It's just a fun little thing that we do while we're out. So when I was driving home this evening, my daughter called and said, hey, I have my gift card to Sheetz, which is a local gas station around here. I don't know if you have them in your area. But she goes, how about when you get home, we go to Sheetz and get slushies. I'm like, oh, I'm up for that. So, So grab your favorite drink, grab a snack, and I want to talk to you more a little bit about my idea, and then I'll get to work. I need to let my stomach digest for a little bit. So this video is all about beginner basics. Now, what I want to go over in this video is just a sort of introductory into the basics of the tools you need to make a quilt. I am going to go over some ideas to help prepare yourself to make a quilt. Whether it's your very first quilt, or maybe you've made a quilt and you want to make another one, and you're still in those early stages, okay? So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to talk about, okay, now this is a cutting mat. It's a self-healing mat, and this one is a small one. It's probably about, what is this? This is 10 inches wide by 10 inches wide. It's a craft size mat. I don't use this for cutting fabric. My daughters sometimes use it for painting, you know, when they're working on a project. My mat is, this is the size of the mat that I started out with. This is 18 inches by 24 inches, okay? It has grid lines on both sides, and it's a good size for beginners. I have this size, and then I also have one on the other table that's 24 inches by 36 inches. And that one is a lot bigger, and I can spread my fabric out a little bit more than on this one. But when I started out, this was the size I worked with, okay? And it functioned well for my purposes. Okay, the next thing you're gonna need is a grid ruler. Now this is the name brand Omni Grid, and this is my original grid. I purchased this in 1999. It is 6 inches by 12 inches, and I use this a lot. It's my go-to. It's my go-to size because it's very manageable. Now, if I want to do bigger blocks, I have a 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. And then I also have a small one that is 5 by 5. And I like this one for cutting half square triangles because if you'll notice, there's a line right across the diagonal, and that's my 45 degree. I trim my half square triangles with this. So, do you need to go out and buy multiple cutting mats? Do you need to go out and buy multiple grid rulers? No. You can start out with one cutting mat, one grid ruler, and I've had the same rotary blade since 1999. All I do is change out the blade itself. I've had the same handle, okay? Same one. That's what you need to get started. Those are the basics. Now, the thing that I want to talk about is when you're working on a quilt, you're going to hear something called a 1/4 inch seam allowance. What is a 1/4 inch seam allowance? I'm going to show you. I'm going to move this back a little bit. Okay, now, in the quilting world, you're going to hear a lot about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. What is a seam allowance? Okay. These two squares are sewn together, okay? This seam right here, this is a seam, okay? The seam is where you sew the two pieces together, and the stitching line right here, that's the seam, and the distance between the seam line and the raw edge of the fabric, that's called the seam allowance, okay? Why do we need a seam allowance when we stitch? Well, if there was no fabric there and we stitched right near the edge, every time we wash this or move the quilt around, that edge would fray and the seam would come apart. That's what the seam allowance is for. Garments have seam allowance, quilts have seam allowance, okay? That's called the seam allowance. And the distance between those two, the seam line and this edge of the fabric, that's a 1/4 inch. And that's what we use in quilting. If you're garment sewing, that distance is going to be different, okay? That's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I have 2 squares here that I've sewn together, okay? And these squares by themselves, so here's a square, and it is cut at 2.5 inches, okay? Now, I just said that the seam allowance is a 1/4 inch. So why did I cut the square at 2.5 inches? Because I need a seam allowance on this side and this side, okay? So 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch is a 1/2 inch. So this square is cut at 2.5 inches all the way around to accommodate for the sides of that cut square. Now, I also have in here, hope I could show you. Do I have it? I know I do. Here's a square. Here's a patch. Okay. These squares, okay, are going into this patch. Okay. Now, the patch right here, once it is in, oops. See, if I had my tripod set up, but unfortunately I can't do that right now. This right here, once it is sewn into the pattern, once it's sewn into the block, okay, from here to here and here to here is finished at 2 inches, okay? Does that make sense? So, when I want to make a quilt, okay, and I say, I want to do a 4 patch. This is a 4 patch, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I want my 4 patch to finish at 8 inches. Then I know each of these squares have to be 4 inches, okay, finished, okay? Always think about finished size. And then from there you can say, okay, if I need 4 of these squares to make this block right here, then I know these squares have to be cut at 4.5 inches. Does it make sense? And then once I sew it in here, it measures 8 inches. The alternating block is one print, and it's one solid print. And I want it to match the same size as my 4 patch. So I know the larger block is going to be finished at 8 inches. So my cuts for this square is going to be 8.5 inches because I need a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side. Does that make sense? So I hope this helps with this little beginner video about the beginning tools that you need to start a quilt. And you don't need to go out and buy every ruler, okay? I started out with a 6 inch by 12 inch ruler and 1 size cutting mat. I've had the same rotary cutter since 1999, and so all I have to do is change out the blade, okay? Those are your basic tools. basic construction is based on your finished size, how many parts are inside that block. In this one, there's 4 squares. So if I know, I'm just recapping, if I know I want this to finish at 8 inches, and there's going to be 4 squares in it, then I know this is going to be 4 inches, and this is going to be 4 inches, and these 2 are going to be 4 inches. So when I cut my squares, these are going to be at 4.5 inches. This one is one large block, and it is going to finish at 8 inches, so it's going to be cut at 8.5, okay? Does that make sense? I'll leave a link below with this quilt so that you can reference this quilt when I made this one. And I'm working on some UFOs, and as a matter of fact, oh, here it is. This is the one that I believe I made this one at the same video I made this one. And I just finished quilting it, you know, putting on the backing and quilting it. And these are both, I would say this is a good toddler quilt, and so is this one. But it's also a lap quilt. I mean, this is a great size. Like, I keep a lap quilt at my desk at work because in the winter months, my legs get cold. The next video I do, we're going to be concentrating on using these tools safely, how to measure and figure out measurements to make a lap size quilt like this using 3 colors, 3 prints, that's it. And for a quilt this size, I could probably figure out in my head. So how about this? Let's figure this out. 8 and 8 is 16 plus 8 is 24. I only need 3 cuts at 4.5 inches. So 4.5 times 3. Oh, we only need ½ yard. Okay, so 1 yard of print, ½ yard of red and blue. Okay? This is what happens when you try to do math in the evening and you're tired. Okay, so the takeaway is, what tools do you need to start making a quilt? What information do you need? What is a 1/4 inch seam allowance? What is a cut size of a piece? What is the finished size of the block? Okay. What are we going to need to make a quilt this size? You need 1 yard of a print. Okay. You need 2 coordinating prints at ½ yard each. Now I had a little extra, so I made a little border on top and bottom. Okay. If everything goes well, tomorrow or Saturday, I'm going to continue part 2 of this video where I show you how to cut these squares properly and safely, and how to sew the 1/4 inch seam allowance on your machine, and how to use your presser foot to create an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. I hope you enjoyed this little impromptu video. I just feel as though that beginners need to arm themselves with this information so that they can move forward in their quilting journey. And if I can impart what I've learned over the past, 25 years, I want to teach you how to do this on your own, because I've had another person reach out to me who bought one of my patterns and said, hey, I want to do this pattern, but I need a bigger size. So I'm going to work on the calculations to create that quilt in a larger size for her. And I'm going to use all this information. What size does she want the quilt to end up being when it's finished? So we already know the pattern. It's going to be a double arch chain. So I'm going to figure out for her how much fabric she's going to need, how many strips she's going to need to cut, so that I can arm her with the information to create the quilt that she wants. Okay? Thanks so much for joining me tonight. My name's Angela Davis, and I'm the 4M Quilter. And remember, why sleep when you can sew? Good night.